Hello and welcome to the Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. Today's guest is Tom Sauer. Is that how you say your name?
That's right.
Sauer, okay. U.S. Naval Academy graduate, 18-year Navy and Marine Corps veteran, and founder of Miramar Health, a veteran-owned mental health and addiction recovery network. From leading elite military teams in some of the world's most dangerous regions to building life-saving programs for Americans' veterans, Tom brings a mission-driven passion for both liberty and the right to life. Get ready for a conversation about service, freedom, and fighting for those who fought for us. So, Tom, thank you for being on the show. Do me a favor and introduce yourself to the listening audience.
Hey, thanks for having me, James. Yeah, my name is Tom Sauer. I'm the founder and owner of Miramar Health, and I'm a former Navy EOD officer. That is explosive ordnance disposal. We're basically the bomb squad for the Navy and also all U.S. Special Operations. So I spent a lot of time working with Special Operations guys during my time.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your service.
It's all right. Hey, they paid me. And, frankly, I feel that they kind of overpaid me sometimes. I was having way too much fun. I know a lot of people who spend their time in the military, they always say, experiences may vary. And I had the time of my life. It really was the best job I ever had. And the only reason I got out was because as an officer, I was an enlisted guy first, but then as an officer, once you get up to a certain level at like lieutenant commander, like 04, equivalent to like a major in the Army, it's all desk jobs afterwards and staff and whatnot. And I wasn't jumping out of planes anymore or going scuba diving with my friends or shooting guns or blowing stuff up. It was PowerPoints and emails.
Ugh.
So that's why and then also the Navy made a terrible mistake when I was stationed in Coronado, California, and they let me go to business school part-time. So I did a really great MBA program at UCLA. And while I was there, I started looking around the classroom and I'm thinking, I'm probably about as smart as that guy. And that guy has way more freedom over his life, doing a lot more, living a really pretty impactful life. He's also making probably 4 or 5 times more money than I am. What am I doing wrong here? And so that's where I kind of had the bug in me that, hey, maybe it's time to go and take my chances in the real world. And that's what I decided to do. And what's crazy is I first started off just working for a defense contractor, as many guys do, when I was stationed in DC when I got out. And I was basically selling combat diving equipment to my friends, underwater stuff. I was a diver by trade. And then I wanted to do something different because, I could tell that I could stay in this job. It was an Israeli company, actually, interestingly enough. And, it was a good job. It paid decently. They sent me to Israel. They sent me to Norway. Did some cool stuff, and it paid okay. But I could tell that I could work for this company for 10 years and I'd be doing pretty much the same thing and making marginally more money. But I didn't really feel like it was very impactful. So, I kind of did some reflection and got some ideas. And I realized the fact that a huge factor of so many veterans, both who are out of the military and even service members in, is that, I've lost way more friends to addiction and suicide than I have to Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Taliban combined. I mean that sincerely.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, and also you ask anyone who spent more than a minute in the service, they'll probably tell you the same thing, And I mean, I'm dealing with somebody right now, a friend or a family member of someone that I know he's himself is fairly high profile, but it's his brother's in a lot of trouble right now. And he was a veteran himself. He's in his late 20s, and he started having suicidal ideations, told people he wants to drink himself to death. He even, said to one of the other family members, "Hey, will you take care of my dog when I'm gone?" So that was huge. Alarm bells.
Oh,
Holy
yeah.
crap, let's go. So that's actually one of the calls I was on this morning. We're going to try to get him. He won't be able to come to our company for different reasons, but we're going to get him placed. Working with the guys at Wounded Warrior and a few other organizations, we're going to make sure we're going to grab him by the collar and make sure that he stays alive. So yeah, that's and so I started the company with actually one of my classmates at the Naval Academy. He's the smart one. He actually went to nuclear power school, not far from where you're from, in South Carolina. He went out there, and he's the smart one. He was the Navy nuclear engineer, so he's good with the numbers and the spreadsheets and all that. So we started the company. We started off very small, and we grew, and then we received the VA community care contract, which allows us to treat veterans within the VA system. We've touched, I'd say right now, I just checked our numbers. I think in the past 5 years, it's been 1,000 veterans. And when I say we touched them, it doesn't mean they had a counseling session with us or we talked to them on the phone. This means that they were inpatient with us for usually minimum of 30 days. That's our standard minimum 30 days for very intensive inpatient treatment. We detox them, medically stabilize them, and then we go through the really, the heavy treatment. And so the guys and gals that we treat, it's mostly guys, by the way, is the guys that we treat are folks who are, these are not the types of folks who are like, hey, I'm sad sometimes, and I think I probably drink a little too much, and I'm arguing with my wife more than usual. That's not the guys that we are usually treating. We are treating the guys who are near death, facing prison or going back to prison, guys who are really, really struggling. So that's who the folks that we treat are. And then you found our website. And
Yeah, I
yeah,
wanted to bring this up. Empowering veterans to create a better future for themselves and their families, and it's MiramarHealth.com. That's Miramar Health.com. And when I read that, I always think of Top Gun when I hear Miramar. But
yeah, it is. I know. What's interesting though is actually when we started the company, we started the initial entity, and then we actually, thing I learned is it's actually sometimes faster and sometimes easier to acquire a company that's already functioning, has the licenses and everything, and then turn it into your own thing. So Miramar was a separate company that we acquired, and then we completely changed it. But because we were able to inherit the licenses, the employees, a lot of the staff, the policy procedures, and that was able to get us started. And that's more on the business side of things, able to get us started. And then we spent the next year or two follow on turning into something completely different from what it was before. Miramar was the original name, still appropriate. Our facilities are in Southern California. Most of them are near the water. Miramar means on the water. And
okay,
also, it doesn't hurt that there's an association with, the base down in San Diego, which is it's actually now a Marine Corps base, a Marine Corps aviation base. But, it doesn't hurt. But yeah, that's what we're about. And it's been a very rewarding experience. We still get letters every once in a while from folks that have been successful. And, and one thing also, to be completely honest, nobody bats 1,000 in this game, and because when a veteran comes to treatment, right, they are not, it's not one of those things where it's like, you have a disease and then we're going to administer treatment and now you're cured. That's not how this works. It's like the patient, the veteran, has to make the decision to make themselves better. What we do is we facilitate and provide the tools to get them going on that journey. But at the end of the day, it's up to that person. And because of that, people relapse. Sometimes they come back. It's usually part of the process. Is quite often it's a chronic condition. And again, I'm saying this, I want to be perfectly clear. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to be one. I don't even play one on the internet, nothing like that. But, I have a team of phenomenal people that do a lot of that. And no small number of them are veterans as well. So, but we get all sorts of fun, we even get really great, before and afters, pictures, stories when they first came here, stuff like that. It's pretty fantastic, really. I mean, so it's been a rewarding journey. As a matter of fact, I'll show you something. I probably should have shared this on the on the screen with you, but I'm going to show you something. I'll show it to the camera, and I'm allowed to actually show this, just so you know, because this gentleman signed a full release, so we can publicly do this. I wouldn't be showing this otherwise, right? Because of confidentiality reasons. So I'll hold this up to the camera. This is a guy. He showed up in February. If you can see that, right?
okay,
That's the gentleman looking pretty rough, right? When he first showed up. 4 months later, or no. In March. I mean,
there's a difference.
A huge. Oh, sorry, that was me and JD Vance. Sorry. So yeah, there's that before and after. And if I met that person beforehand, and he showed me that picture, I would think, oh, is your father dying of cancer, or something? You know what I mean? When you see that, and I mean that it's not just mental, but it also manifests itself physically too. So, what got me started on all this, not only just because veterans, that I knew, but also my father. My dad struggled with alcohol and drugs and depression his entire life. And 3 weeks before I graduated high school and left for the military, left for the Marines, he died of a meth overdose. And so that always kind of stuck with me a lot. And, including that. And then, my wife's father, just a couple of years ago, drank himself to death. My father-in-law, so, I mean, this is something that's a big deal. I mean, I'm sure that you and your audience everyone has someone in their life that's had a real struggle with drugs and alcohol, suicide, any of those things. So I mean, it's a much pervasive disease that our country is suffering from, more so than in other countries too, which is really interesting. I don't have a full answer as to why that's happening. I've got some ideas, but I'm not sure. So that's a little sad in some ways, but it's also kind of inspiring in other ways too. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm glad that you and your organization are there, in that people, veterans especially, that can avail themselves of your services. I know I have several friends that are veterans. My dad was in the Army for 26 years. I've never served in the military because I have a club foot, and they were like, "Yeah, no, you're disabled, so we don't want you." And so I signed up for the draft way back when, and I'm like, okay, well, so much for that. And I know that one of the things that I see that's really kind of sad here in our area, and I'm sure it's not, it's probably the same everywhere else, but behind all these big box stores like Walmart and Target and Sam's Wholesale, blah, 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 we have tent cities of homeless people, and a lot of
Yeah.
those homeless people are veterans.
Yes.
And I know I spent 10 years in street ministry in Houston, Texas when I was
Oh,
in
wow.
my
Okay.
early 20s, and so I've dealt a lot with homeless people. And I know that, always ask people, I say, what's the difference between you and a homeless person? They're like, well, I don't know. You have a paycheck, right? And as soon as you lose your income, guess what? Eventually, companies are going to shut you off, take your car, kick you out of your house, and all of a sudden you're homeless with 3 plastic bags of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's sad in America that we have veterans who have served in foreign wars and have fought for our freedoms, and now they're living in a tent city behind Walmart.
Right.
And I understand that it's a complicated situation, and one mold doesn't fit everybody, and I know that one of the reasons people become homeless is because of alcohol and drugs and different types of addictions of different types of drugs, and it just destroys their life,
Yes.
and I guess some of the people that I see that are veterans, I guess they're so far gone that they're not at a place where they can easily avail themselves of the programs that are out there.
Yes.
I don't think there's an easy path. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you don't like to get a job, even to get a job, you have to have a physical street address. You have to have a driver's license, a legal means of identification. You have to have a car. It's not, you and I take all of that for granted because we've been
Right.
doing it for so long. But if you were to lose your job and lose your house, your vehicle, your ID, your identity, all of a sudden it's a huge undertaking just to get a job at McDonald's, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so yeah, I can speak to that quite a bit. So one of the things that we've done our own outreach as well. So we'll drive up about 45 minutes, an hour north up to Los Angeles, and I mean, talk about some tent cities. And we actually go to. I was there just. We had one just a couple months ago, and we're going to have some more soon. We went to. Have you heard of Skid Row? You might have heard of
Oh
Skid
yeah,
Row before. Yeah, that's pretty
oh
much
yeah,
the large. It's like a tent metropolis practically, and it's a scary place. I'll be honest. But we were there, fortunately, middle of the day. And what we did is we did an outreach to everybody, but we were also seeking out. What we did is we set up some tables on the sidewalk. We had our van pull up, and we ordered 500 hamburgers from Carl's Jr. Like that's Carl's Jr. is the Hardee's of the West Coast.
got
So
you, got
yeah,
you.
that's what that is, right? And so we were basically handing out burgers, clean socks, hand sanitizer, a couple of plastic poncho tarps because it does rain sometimes in Los Angeles, and then also Narcan. Or if you know with Narcan, it's the
Oh yeah,
antidote to opioids. Yeah, we hand out Narcan
yep.
and a few other just kind of amenities, things like that. But what we did is they came by and they came to take the burger. Took some. Oh, I'll take some socks. I'll take a tarp. I'll take some water. Strangely enough, a lot of people refuse the Narcan. They say, "Oh no, I don't need that." Okay, maybe you do, but at the end of the table, we would ask around, like, because we would point them the direction, because there are a lot of homeless shelters and missions in that area. But we also specifically were asking, like, hey, are you a veteran? And you'd be surprised at the number of veterans around. Are you a veteran? Do you know somebody in the area who is? Because what we're able to do, we're able to get them help and refer them out to the VA. And then, hey, maybe you start seeking help through the VA and go from there. I'll say this much about the homelessness issue, and this might be a, how do I say this, an unpopular opinion. America does not have a homelessness crisis. America has an addiction and mental health crisis. And what I mean by that is that whenever you see any of these tent cities or anything like that, I would say 99.8% of those people are either severely addicted to something, usually alcohol, fentanyl, opioids, or methamphetamines. Quite often all three. They're all severely addicted or they're severely mentally ill, usually both. And also what comes from this is some of the drugs, especially a lot of the methamphetamines that the cartels now produce. It used to be, remember, like the days of you hear like Breaking Bad and people had meth labs and trailers and cabins out in the woods. There are very few of those anymore because the cartels look at this and they say, well, wait a second, that's cutting into our market share. So they started producing their own higher quality, more potent methamphetamine, crystal meth. And now that stuff is throughout the United States on top of all the fentanyl and the other opioids. And some of the methamphetamines are so powerful that it will cause a drug-induced psychosis that you're not coming back from, which is really scary, right? And so a lot of those people, like, for lack of better, and again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a clinician, but I mean, in layman's terms, your brain's fried, often permanently, as in you're not going to fully come back, which is really sad. Or you might come back, but you're not all there. On top of that, even here's the other part is, here in California, and I don't know if they changed in South Carolina where you are, is, marijuana is fully legal. It's easier to get marijuana in California than it is to get cigarettes. I'm not kidding.
It's still illegal here, but
is
that
it?
doesn't
Okay, I know
make
they
any
got that
difference.
Delta 8 and all that other crap out there. But marijuana it's easier to get marijuana in California than to get cigarettes. I'm not kidding.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah. And so, but the thing is also because of this, they've had all these advances in, agriculture where marijuana cannabis these days is far, far more potent today than it was when, when I was a teenager and probably definitely when you were a teenager. And so the thing is here's the other thing and these are things that I've only learned recently, is that quite often what trips people into schizophrenia is heavy cannabis use. And there's studies on, I can't pull them up right now, but there are studies on this, you can look it up, is that if you might be a genetic carrier for schizophrenia, which we don't actually know what causes it and how it works, but it is genetic, you could be a carrier for it. It might run in your family. And you're fine. You carry it, but you'll never have any symptoms. You don't get it. But if you are a heavy user of cannabis, and we're talking even one heavy use of like really potent stuff, like let's say you're in college or something, right? One heavy use can break the glass on that, and now you've got schizophrenia, and there ain't no coming back from that. It's really sad. So I know that that marijuana cannabis legalization was this experiment that we tried, and I think it's failed, frankly. And I'm generally a more live and let live, whatever. I don't really care, but I feel between that and just honestly just the public nuisance it is, I think it was probably a bad idea. So that's one aspect of it. But I got to say that overall, kind of coming back to your overall point, is that we have it's an addiction crisis. It's a mental health crisis because all the things you described, if you lose your job, you don't have an address, you can't pay the rent, you can't pay for anything, and then you find yourselves on the streets. I would argue that there are very few people who are otherwise sober, mentally clear, mentally stable, who are chronically homeless for a long period of time, right, and aren't those things. Now, granted, they might fall into that, right? But usually the cause of the fact that they lost a job and they lost all their money and none of their friends or family are willing to help them is because of the addiction. Because all their money went to the drugs, or then they lost their job because of the drugs. They start stealing from their family members because of the drugs, and the family members cut them off, right? And sadly, that's kind of what has to happen because you can't keep enabling this behavior. So again, that's one of the things I also speak to. And here's another thing as well, is obvious. I'm sure you've heard of the military-industrial complex, obviously. Sure. Well, There's another one out there that some friends of mine I refer to. It's called the homeless industrial complex. And what I mean from that is that there are huge departments within governments, federal, state, local, and big nonprofits with big budgets whose executives get $250, $300, $400,000 a year salaries, right? And their job is to fix the homelessness problem, which usually involves handing out clean needles, safe injection sites, handing out some bottles of water, and not actually getting them off the street. Because, like with the military industrial complex, right? These are the weapons companies, all that. They depend on war. And trust me, I practiced war for most of my adult life, right? And I'm not saying this is necessarily, you need a military, you need weapons, right? You need to have that. I get it. But those defense companies are incentivized for there to be war or threat of war or conflict all the time. That is what they want. Same with the homeless industrial complex. These city governments, state governments as well, their jobs and their budgets depend on there constantly being a problem. These charities and nonprofits constantly depend on there being a homelessness problem. If they eradicated homelessness in a given city, those city budgets go away. All these people lose their jobs. Those NGOs don't have any funding anymore, right? Because the problem got solved. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that goes for, honestly, that goes for any political movement, right? And so it doesn't have to apply to homelessness. You can say the same thing with right to life, abortion. I'm a practicing Catholic. I'm very pro-life as it gets. But what sounds really strange to say this is the worst thing that happened to the pro-life movement. I mean, and I'm talking about these infrastructures, these political organizations, these PACs that are pro-life, and these organizations whose senior staff, some of whom I know, get $400,000 salaries to put on big fundraisers and have marches and awareness. The worst thing that happened to those organizations was the Dobbs decision of striking down Roe v. Wade. I know that sounds really perverse and kind of dark, but it's kind of what happened. Same thing you could say with even gun control, right? Now, thankfully, one of the things, thank God, is that especially since BLM in the summer of St. George Floyd, peace be upon him, is that America is much more pro 2A today than it was 25, 30 years ago. And, in more states where we've got right to carry, right, constitutional carry in more states, I think that's really a good thing. But also, and it needs to be preserved. But a lot of times, so do you see what I'm saying with all this? It's like the government agencies, and on these nonprofits and political organizations, their livelihoods depend on there always being something wrong. So are they really there to fix the problem? I would love it if today, one day, right, that all of a sudden we were able to eradicate addiction and mental illness. Like you hypothetically flip a switch or give some magic one-time pill to everybody and they're cured of their addiction, let's say, right? Not going to happen. But if it was, I'd gladly go find a new business or a new way to make a living somehow, right? Does it make sense? But there's a lot of folks out there that don't. They just don't. They depend on there being a problem. So I know I'm not trying to sound dark and black-pilled about it, but it's just the reality of the situation.
Well, I think it's kind of a systemic issue, multifaceted issue that there are no single answers, and so we have to try to break the problem down and figure it out as much as possible. And I guess you just have to cherry pick. You just have to go after the low-hanging fruit and go after those people that are savable, for lack of better terminology. And I work security. I'm retired for 30 years in IT, and so I have to work security part-time at Walmart just to make ends meet. And I see a lot of homeless people.
I bet you do.
And there's 2 or 3 people that are in their 60s, about the same age as me. One guy I know for a fact, he lives in he back when he was working and had money, he pre-planned for this, but he bought a renovated or he bought an old ambulance van and he renovated it. And he's got a mattress in the back, sleeps on it at night in the Walmart parking lot. Very clear-headed, very clear mind. I talk to him all the time. He goes to a public pool to swim every day or every other day and takes a shower, and then he goes to Walmart and gets his food. He's on Social Security, benefits. He gets his Social Security check at the end of the month, and there's a little old lady that she's been on the street for 2 years, and there's nothing wrong with her mind. She's not addicted to anything, and she's just so acclimated to being on the streets. I don't think she would, if somebody offered her a place to stay, I don't think she would accept it because she's just so used to her lot in life now, right?
That's very strange. Well, I'll say this.
It's very sad.
No, it is very much so. I mean, well, I guess I'd say where we are, I'm near a big city, is you don't really see too much of that around here. It's usually almost everybody you see is addicted. And I'd be very curious to know, because like in my mind, somebody who is just used to living in their car or on the street or something like that, it kind of tells me that, well, something ain't right. But I mean,
Sure.
maybe I could be wrong. Something ain't right. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying. It's really interesting because I did a lot of travel both in and out of the military, and I spent some time in India. Been there a couple times, and in India, I mean, there's so many people who just live outside. I mean, that's just how they live. They live in, oh yeah, I mean, they live in slums and everything like that, and that's just kind of how they live. I suppose it's because they've been living like that for generation after generation. That's just kind of what they're used to. And I remember I had a buddy of mine who was an Indian fella, a businessman, worked for Panasonic, very wealthy, successful Indian man. And he told me that, he had a housekeeper. He lives in Gurgaon, which is like the nice suburb of New Delhi, right? It's like they got a lot of the tech companies are there in India,
Right.
right?
Right.
And he's a very very wealthy successful man, and he had a full time housekeeper, right? Because you have a full time live in housekeeper for just a couple $100 a month, right? And they think they're doing just great. And he told me that the housekeeper and her children lived out in a slum, like a few blocks away, like in a tent, like in a lean-to. And they saw this, and what they did is they bought her an apartment in the same building complex as they were, like a smaller one. And they lived there for about a month, and they moved out. They moved out. They
Wow.
went back in the street. Yeah,
That's
because I was
crazy.
just yeah. And then another buddy of mine was telling me that he was in there's a port city. Was it Gao? Gosh, can't remember. There's a port city out there. It's like a beach town. The name escapes me. I'm blanking on the name. It's an old Portuguese port, right? They used to have it still, so it's still got a lot of Portuguese influence. There's actually a lot of Christians there, Indian Christians, and fishing town, right? So a lot of people have little fishing boats up on the beach. They live on the beach pretty much. I mean, they're kind of almost like what we consider beach bums, right? But they go out in their fishing boats, they catch their food, they trade it, whatever, and they just kind of live like that. And what happened was a cyclone came through, knocked everything down, wrecked everything, and a lot of people died. But those who were survivors that were there, the government decided to build, public housing right on the other side of the road from the beach. Nice apartments, all that. People lived there for less than a month, and they always moved back on the beach. It was just a weird. They did not. They're like, no, we don't need this building. No, we're to live out here. It's very strange. And so, which
I
is
guess
when you
that's what
tell.
they're used to.
Yeah, it is. And I thought it was strange when you mentioned like an American, who ordinarily seems, by all other accounts, is well adjusted, choosing to live that life. That is troubling. And yeah, but for what it's worth, the big cities that I go to, we don't see much of that. It's usually they're severely disturbed or they're addicted. Usually both.
Yeah, I have experience with the homeless population. It's been, several decades removed. Things have changed a lot, I'm sure. I was in downtown Houston in my early 20s, and that was the group of homeless people that I dealt with. As I talked to homeless people, of course, my heart goes out to them because as a young man, I actually wound up on the streets myself, and I wound up in a street rescue mission called Star of Hope Mission.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long story. I didn't wind up there because of addiction of any kind. I lost my job, lost my car, lost my apartment, wound up under a bridge. Make a long story short, God had to get my attention on some things, and He did. And I managed to
Thank
grow
God.
from that experience and get out. I'm a success story, I guess you could say.
Sounds like it.
But one of the things that I learned and I'm cognizant of, I guess this comes with age and wisdom. But when people tell you their story, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, right? And not everybody wants to tell you their deep, dark secrets or want to
Right.
admit to the root of the problem that causes them to get there, right?
Or even to themselves.
Yeah, yeah, and so there's a whole myriad of, like, I spent some time in mental health, mental retardation at Terrell State Hospital
Mm-hmm.
back when I was in my early 20s before I got into law enforcement, and I worked on a Dallas County lockup ward where they had, schizophrenics and catatonics and different levels of psychosis and psychotics, and so I literally worked at a funny farm.
Yeah.
And there is no such thing as a rubber room. It's called a concrete room.
Yeah.
But anyway, you run into people with different mental affects, right? Some people are relatively clear and can hold a general conversation. You know, they can string sentences together, and you can actually stand there and converse with them. And then you have those people that are hitting themselves in the head, and it sounds like there's a legion of demons in them. And, you know, they're fighting with God knows what,
Sometimes might
and
be.
they're just batshit crazy, right?
Yeah.
And so there's everything between batshit crazy and relatively normal, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so I have to be very measured in. I mean, I'm not rich, right? We're doing good to keep the lights on, so I can't afford to hand out $100 bills,
Right.
but I can buy somebody a Happy Meal or
Right.
something like that,
Sure.
right? And so I try to do as much as I can without placing myself or my family in danger of taking people into your house and all of that stuff. You have to be
Not a good
careful with
idea.
that.
Yeah. Very
But
much so.
anyway, so yeah, it's I don't know. My heart goes out to them, and I'm glad that your organization is there and that y'all are able to reach out to veterans and help a certain percentage of those folks get get out of their, obviously get cleaned up and
Yeah.
detoxed and get their as much of their mental facilities back that they can, and then hopefully they can become a success story.
Here's a no. Thank you. I appreciate that. Here's a question for you, James, and I think I know how I feel on it, but I'm not sure. Is as you might be aware, President Trump has been talking about a lot of the homelessness issue and basically saying, and I think he would generally agree with my position that, which I think is your position as well, is that the vast majority of these people, maybe not every one of them, but the overwhelming majority of the people who are chronically homeless, especially in the big cities, are addicted, right, or at least or very severely mentally ill, and they've been talking about, hey, we need to get them off the streets. They need to be forced into some sort of treatment or something, right? Get them out of what the situation they're in. And this is something here in California that Governor Ronald Reagan, he did when he was there, when he was governor, is he shut down a lot of what you refer to as funny farms, and because there was some abuse going on in those places. And you could make an argument that you were denying some people of their constitutional rights as far as freedom and whatnot. And I'm curious now if maybe we were too far at one point, perhaps. I don't know. I wasn't around back then, but maybe now it's been too laissez-faire. And honestly, I think we're doing far more harm to these people by allowing them on the streets, right? Where they're just going to be subject to violence, all sorts of degenerate activity, degradation, all sorts of terrible things, all sorts of demons. They need to be taken. I think a lot of them really do need to be taken off the streets. I'm kind of curious your thought on that because I watched an interview with an American gentleman who spent time in Holland and in Amsterdam, which is notoriously known for having a lot of laissez-faire drug policies. Drugs, prostitution, all that's legal. But what they don't have, though, is they don't have the same addiction problems that we have in the States and in much of the West, where their attitude towards it is sleeping on the street is illegal. You will go to jail. And if you have a problem, basically the state takes you into custody, essentially, and you will be confined, essentially, into a government. And granted, it's different in Holland when it's a small country, but you're confined essentially into like a government run treatment center, and they do the carrot and the stick where somebody says you're essentially in like almost like a squad bay, like a platoon. You're sleeping in this community home, and you have to work, not unlike we hear about like Salvation Army, right, where it's like the Salvation Army where, hey, it's a lot of tough love, you're gonna work or you're not gonna be here anymore, and somebody says, well, I don't want to live in this condition. It's like, okay, well, did you get a job? Did you go to the job interview we set you up with? Okay, if you get a job, we'll get you your own room or apartment. And eventually force them out where if you play ball and you decide to become a functioning member of society, you're free. But if you don't, we're not going to tolerate that kind of behavior. I think that something similar to Holland might be something that needs to be instituted here. But again, the homeless industrial complex might not like that.
Well, it's a complicated situation. Um, I remember back many moons ago, back in the 80s, 90s, 2000, early 2000s. I know there were. You want to find out where corruption is in America? Just follow the money, right? It's happening at the
Yes.
local, county, state, federal. It's just rampant everywhere. And I remember where this came to light because of news stories, but some of these mental institutions, and they don't call them mental institutions, they call them behavioral realignment centers. I don't know, behavioral
Different
something.
names, yeah.
Yeah, they give them different names and make them sound a little softer, not quite as harsh.
Church them up.
But what happens is when people enter into those facilities, they may actually have some sort of insurance, right?
Yeah.
And so they milk the insurance for the patient for as long as they can, and then when they run out of insurance, and the insurance company says, "Yeah, well, that's the end of that. We're not paying anymore." Then guess what? Then they take those people out of those mental hospitals, and they put them on a bus, and they bus them to these big inner cities and cut them loose. And I remember here in Charleston, downtown Charleston is a huge tourist trap, right? Got rich history, Civil War, yada, yada, yada.
Beautiful city.
Beautiful city.
Yeah.
But they had a problem with homeless people down off of Meeting Street. And they had developers coming in, and they were trying to build these 5-star hotels and these concierge hotels, and they're trying to attract more visitors from all over the world to come spend their money, right? The tourist industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah.
And so obviously downtown Charleston, the mayor or whoever got together, and so they took some Greyhound buses down there, and they scooped all the homeless people up, all their tents, all their belongings, and then they bust them, I don't know, North Charleston, wherever, Columbia. They bust them out of, far enough out of reach of downtown Charleston that they couldn't walk there unless they were like, it was going to take them 60 days to get there, right?
Sure.
They made it.
Yeah.
They physically removed them from that location to make it difficult for them to get back.
Yep.
And now the developers are going down there and they're building these concierge hotels, and there's still a smattering of street people that you'll run into. They'll be standing on a street corner begging for money, which is illegal. The police have more serious issues to deal with than that.
Right.
So there's that issue. And what was your original question?
Well, I guess what do you think of having to a lot of these folks need to be institutionalized, right? Or at least until they prove that they can become functioning members of society, and that might have to be something the government does, because I'm not really sure of any other way. Because the alternative is either like what you said, they live on the street and then they get shuffled around, shipped to another city. Rather in California, rather notoriously about a year or so ago, downtown San Francisco, which, by the way, San Francisco is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, or was, right? It's absolutely gorgeous, right? And, but it's full of all these tent cities everywhere. And then when the Chinese president was coming to town, President Xi, all of a sudden, magically, the whole place gets cleaned up, right? So that when the Chinese president's motorcade rolls through, he doesn't see all these slums. He sees all the nice, pretty, beautiful San Francisco. So, that's the sort of thing I think of where it's like they kind of get shuffled around. Honestly, I think there does need to be a tough love aspect of that. There are some people that, unfortunately, probably aren't going to be able to be saved. And I know that maybe institutionalizing those people might seem inhumane, but I think it's far more inhumane to let them just fester and die on the street, because that's what happens to them.
I think that local government, state government, and communities that we all live in, I think if people had a heart or a mindset to try to address the problem, I think that it could be done. Of course, it would cost money, which means we'd all be taxed 6 ways to Sunday, which we already are anyway.
Yeah. Somehow
it would have to be funded, right? And one of the problems is that, back to the carrot and stick thing.
Right.
One of the I am familiar with street rescue missions, and I kind of know how they work. Salvation Army, Starvation Mission, all the different missions. They are funded by United Way or other different government entities, local churches, blah blah blah. Right. So they allow people to come in off the street, and they go, okay, we're gonna give you 3 hot meals a day. You can stay here from 10 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning. Then we're going to feed you. You'll have to go to a church service, and then we're going to kick you out on the street and go find a job. Ultimately, the purpose or the mission for getting these people off the street is that we're going to provide some of your creature comforts, medicines, food, shelter. We're trying to address some of your spiritual needs, mental health needs if you need, whatever. But ultimately, we're going to do all of these things to help you so that you can, at some point, like me, go out and find you a job and then start standing on your own 2 feet.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems that I have seen and heard of is that a lot of people, when they go to these shelters, they've been on the streets for so long and they're so screwed up on drugs or on alcohol addiction, drug
Sure.
addiction, whatever, or they're just purely mean and evil, right? There are those people too. And they refuse to follow basic rules.
Yeah.
Like that those homeless shelters are they're communities unto themselves, right? But they have to have basic rules like you can't come in here and fight with people. You can't curse people. You can't curse the staff. You got to behave yourself.
Can't use
You can't
drugs.
no drinking, no alcohol, no drugs. You can't breathe. We catch you smoking a doobie. You're out on the street. You do anything. You can't be selling drugs in here. And so there are some basic rules that is asked of them that they just don't want to follow. They're so used to being independent, even though their independence has cost them everything.
Right.
Their independence is a byproduct of addiction or unlawfulness. And a lot of these people, homeless people, they've been in and out of prisons all their life.
Oh yeah.
Or they've been in and out of jail all their life, right?
Yeah.
And so, part of the problem is no matter how much money we throw at the problem, if you have a population of people that refuse to follow basic rules and be good human beings, right? And be trainable and be moldable and be cognizant of the fact that they need help and that they're going to have to change their behaviors a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
100%.
that ultimately is a larger problem than the addictions, right?
Yeah, it often is. No, you're absolutely right. And that's why I think situations like those, in those cases where it's like, hey, maybe those people do need to be in some sort of custody until they proven otherwise. Until they show otherwise. You're always going to have miscreants in any society who are not you're not going to be able to save, at least in the mortal sense, right? At least on this earth. Unfortunately, that's what it is. But the thing is, though, is that there are so many people out there who, I think it's primarily because of the drugs. It's so prevalent everywhere. And I mean, for example, when I was in Skid Row, you see people at various phases of addiction, right? So I'd see some folks where I look at this gentleman, come through who was in really bad shape. I know that it sounds terrible. He looked like a walking corpse. He was hard to look at. And this guy, I don't know how old he was. I mean, he looked like he was in his 70s. He could have been in his 40s for all I could tell. I don't know. But I looked at this guy, and when we were handing things out, and I looked at him, I'm like, this guy's going to be dead in a month. And I don't know what happened, but he very well likely. And then I also see another kid who looked like he was 16, 17 years old, who was actually looked a little dirty, but he's wearing nice clothes, had a hip, cool little haircut. And I'm looking, oh, this kid, and he looked like he kind of came, this sounds weird, I got a vibe from that, like he came from a well-to-do family. I'm
right.
like, oh, here's a kid who maybe got into a little bit of trouble when he's in high school, is probably still in high school, should be in school, and probably came from a nice household, got involved in drinking, got hooked on some heavy drugs, and he just left home, came to Skid Row, and he's currently on a bender right now for the next week or two. And unless somebody grabs that kid by the collar and does something about it, he's going to end up like this person. It's almost like, they used to show on the internet, they show the faces of meth, right? Did you ever say they show mug shots of someone from when they're in their 20s, a booking, and then like a couple years later, and they look, unrecognizable. They look like they're near death. And frankly, in some they even look even demonic. I mean, it's terrifying. And so I got to see like the early phases of that, But I think there's a lot of kids out there, a lot of people out there that, there's no easy answer. And a lot of, I think, the least bad solutions the least bad, right? I'm not saying it's a good one. The least bad solutions might actually appear to be rather inhumane, but I think it is the least bad solution to fix some of these things. And because at the same time, it's like, what about the rest of society? Why do I have to live around that? Why do I have to have, why is it that I have to, especially, we have a friend of ours who lives up in Venice Beach, California, up in Los Angeles, right? Which is actually, if it weren't for all the bums and addicts everywhere, it'd be a beautiful beach city, right? There's actually, and it's weird because you'd see junkies and bums shuffling around everywhere right next to like high-end restaurants, really beautiful shopping, great place. I mean, say what you want about Southern California. The weather's gorgeous. There's great scenery. It's really nice. But then, you're it's a very weird juxtaposition. And you see all this, and it's like, why is it that we have to tolerate this, right, from you? I think that just like as a tax-paying member of the wealthiest country in the world, we shouldn't have to put up with that. And so I think there should be consequences for not being any sort of contribute and being, frankly, being a massive, massive threat to safety, to their own and to the safety of others as well. So it's just, I sound like some hardliner. I sound like, I know I do, but it's like, I mean, I've kind of, I used to be kind of libertarian in some of my thinking, and frankly, just, seeing what I've seen, it's kind of shaken that out of me, I guess,
Yeah, in some future dystopian world, I guess we would like just to scoop them all up, put them in a Greyhound bus, and ship them off to some Pacific remote island or something.
Well, you know what was crazy though is they used to do that. Well, not quite like that, but so
That's
for
what we should be
example,
doing with violent criminals.
100%. Well, they used to have before they had the idea of a treatment center or what you call rehab or whatever you want to call it. They had dry out camps. Have you ever heard of those
Right.
before? But they'd be
Yep.
ranches and farms where it's like, hey, if you were, at the time, the opium or whatever was not as much of an issue as mostly alcohol, and if you're a complete stumbling drunk, people just round you up, put you on a wagon or train, and they'll take you to a camp, and hey, you're there to work, right? Where basically it's like you're getting 3 squares and a clean bed. And basically you're going to work and you're going to read the Bible and you're going to get fed and you're going to dry out. And then when you're ready, then
Then you go to the next step.
Yeah, exactly right. And, again, that sounds very draconian and hardline, but I don't know what else you got.
Well, going back to the young man you were talking about,
Yeah.
I have a parenting podcast called ABC's of Parenting Adult Children, and I talk to a lot of parents that have young people that fall into addictions, right?
Okay.
And parents, bless their hearts, they do everything within their power to get those kids sober, dried out, take them to treatment facilities, whatever the insurance can afford to pay for.
Yep.
And sometimes, like you said, addicts will go out of they'll steal you blind, they'll rob you blind and lie to your face, and you're doing everything you can to provide them a roof over their head and the help that they need to get better, and they just refuse to get better. And at some point, parents have to stop enabling, and they just have to go, you know what? We're just going to wash our hands of you, and now you can go outside and do whatever you want to do, but you're not going to live here anymore because you're such a huge disruption to our family.
Yes.
And you bring an element of criminality into our home. We don't feel safe with you anymore. They get involved with criminal. They steal out in community and do criminal acts to feed their addiction, right? And that is a sad situation unto itself. But at a young age, you would hope and think that they are in a better place. No matter how addicted they are, they're in a better place to get help.
Yes.
Right? Because they haven't spent a lifetime blowing their minds up, or they're not in the final stages of being a walking zombie.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's they also refer to that as like the failure to launch. Sometimes they're call it like young adults, yeah, and which with the failure to launch is not necessarily somebody who's an addict, somebody who just can't get it together. But no, I think that's absolutely right, and I've known a lot of people who've done that. Matter of fact, I can think of somebody in my life who I don't talk to anymore, who in his 20s was actually very successful for a short time, and got in over his skis, and then became an addict, and he lost his wife, all of his friends, his family cut him off, and it was really sad too. I mean, he came from a big family, Christian family. He's the oldest of 10 kids. His father was a retired Army colonel, West Point graduate, all that, and he's a very intelligent young man, extremely sharp. But he got a little bit of, megalomania, got over his skis, and then fell into addiction when business wasn't going well. And, he got institutionalized briefly, and he kind of disappeared off the radar for a couple of years, and started getting some random texts from him randomly, and he hits me up on social media, and nope, not doing anything with you anymore, unfortunately. So,
right.
Because also he was in massive, massive schizophrenia psychosis as well, which are really unfortunate. He just needs to get help, but it's like I'm not in a position to help him with anything. So
Well, sometimes it just boils down to self-preservation and protecting yourself and your family, right?
Oh yeah, no, 100%. I just, I'm not letting that kind of evil into my home. Sorry, you know.
Right. So
So
for those listening right now, whether they're veterans, family members, or concerned citizens, what's the most important step they can take today to help?
wow. Okay. Well, I'd say if you're a concerned citizen, I would say we're dealing with the VA, because here's something as well that we've had a massive issue dealing with the VA. Right? Is that, and also this sounds crazy, but everyone loves to say, especially in DC, right? They love to say that, oh, veterans issues, it's a nonpartisan, not political issue. The hell it is, right? It is a very partisan, very political issue. And essentially, the analogy that I draw is between with a lot of veterans' mental health care, veterans' issues, and dealing with the VA in particular. The analogy is very similar to public education, right? So if you look at the VA as a struggling, bloated, overly bureaucratic public health system or public school district, right? Community care providers who are contracted like mine, and there's hundreds of others like mine, we're the charter schools, right? And we provide arguably better service and for significantly less money than it costs the public school district themselves. So then what does that public school system think of those charter schools? You know what I'm saying? And what do the bureaucrats and the administrators think of those charter schools? Now imagine putting the public school district in charge of deciding which students go to the charter schools. How's that going to work? Right? So very similar situations. Obviously, the VA's mental health, addiction, and suicide prevention programs are exceptionally well funded, but they're completely beyond their capacity, right? They can't sustain it. So, but the thing, that is why we have the community care network, so that we can take, when the veteran has a choice and they want to seek help out in the community at a private establishment like mine, which actually costs significantly less than it costs the VA to do themselves, just because, private versus public, many such cases. And the veteran wants to come in the community, or they might choose to be in the VA system, fine. But the thing is, the VA quite often, actually more often than not, denies them that choice. Tells them, no, we can't give you a community care referral. And think of this, if you're a veteran and you're in a mental health crisis or addiction crisis, and you finally decide to raise your hand and say, hey, I need help. And you walk into that VA hospital, you call your provider and say, hey, I'm in an addiction crisis, I'm in a mental health crisis. One, that's a big step. That takes a lot for somebody to do.
Sure.
And then when they get told by the VA, well, we can get you an assessment in about a week, 10 days. We can book you for an assessment. And then probably about 2 to 3 weeks after that, we might be able to get you a bed at our in-house facility. And then if they ask, well, what about community care? Isn't there something available now? No, we can't do community care. At least not now. No, we have to wait until the wait list is more than 30 days, right? That's a problem. That's a very serious problem. And also it defies the VA Mission Act, which President Trump signed into law in 2018. And as it is today, the VA still violates the Mission Act. And imagine this way. If you were, now you mentioned people you dealt with who have family members that are struggling with addiction, let's say, right? And they have an insurance card. So if you're a civilian off the streets, I spoke about this on The Blaze TV with Matt Peterson, good friend of mine. Is if you're a civilian on the street, right, or so to speak, and you're in an addiction crisis, mental health crisis, but you've got an insurance policy, you've got like a bare bones, we're talking low grade, meets the Obamacare health insurance requirements, right? The bare bones requirement. You go to a treatment facility that's in network with that provider. Let's say it's Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, whatever. You don't even need to call to make an appointment. You could literally knock on the door and say, hi, can you help me? Here's my insurance. They will take a look at your insurance. They'll verify, yes, you meet the insurance requirements. You are covered. Come on in. Welcome. They'll put you right. Now, granted, with insurance, there's deductibles and copays involved. We get that. But they'll admit you. A veteran who is in the VA healthcare system does not have that same level of access. And when you think about VA healthcare, you don't think about their dermatology program, their radiology, their orthopedics. They're pretty good at prosthetics. I'll say that much. They're quite good for obvious reasons, right? But you don't think about those programs. You think about their mental health, their addiction, their suicide prevention. Those are the biggest problems facing veterans across the country today. But a veteran doesn't have that same level of care. And so also when somebody says, I need help, That is an emergent situation. That is something where you got to grab that guy or gal by the collar, so to speak, get him off the X, as we would all say in the military, get him out of there, get him out of the fire, get him out of the fight, and get him in a bed. In a bed as in get him placed somewhere. And veterans don't have that same level of access to care. It's preposterous. And it doesn't follow the law. So because of what I was seeing this, 2 years ago, I was fortunate enough, I testified before the House Veterans Affairs Committee, explained this whole situation. Now, we were under a different regime at that time, under a different president. And everyone at VA smiled and nodded. Okay, yeah, don't worry, we're going to fix that. Nothing happens. So now that President Trump is in office and Secretary Collins is there, things are starting to change. But he's been in the seat for about 6 months. And, look, I'm credit to him. It's like turning the Titanic around. People don't realize that the VA is the second largest agency in the federal government. The only agency in the government that's bigger than the VA is the military, right? Get an idea. Like, how many people do you think are employees of the VA? Just take a guess. How many number of employees?
I don't know. Wow.
The VA has more employees than the United States Army has soldiers.
That's crazy.
That's crazy, right? Now, you would think, and now also they only provide care. So, in the United States, we classify a veteran as someone who was on active duty, no longer on active duty. So that includes retirees, reservists are considered veterans as well if they spent some time on active duty, now they're not. We've got about, I think the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, did a whole study on this, and it's a few years old, but the numbers are roughly the same. Got somewhere around 21 million veterans in the United States. Of those 21 million, and this is a few years ago, it might be a little bit different, but the numbers are roughly the same. 9 million of those veterans are enrolled in VA healthcare. And only about 6.5 million veterans are actually actively receive their medical care from VA. So for 6.5 million veterans, you've got this gigantic organization. And even though there are a ton of them in need of addiction treatment and mental health treatment, we're not talking about that many compared to 6.5 million. But the government still struggles to do this. And they throw all this money at these programs when the community care network costs less. I've seen a senior VA official from San Francisco post publicly online that it costs about $4,000 a day for the VA to treat a veteran in like an in-house mental health addiction treatment facility, about $4,000 a day. It costs a community care provider dramatically less. But the thing is, though, is again, it just comes down to that public versus private. They look at community care providers, such as me and the hundreds of other ones out there, as a threat, once again, to their budgets, to their livelihood.
Right, of course.
Bring it back, right? And so that's one of the struggles I have. So, bring it all the way back to answer that question. There's currently a bill in Congress right now called the Access Act. And I think it's made out of committee, last I checked. And what that does is that really codifies the access requirements for veterans. What it really is saying is, hey, that thing that we wrote, the Mission Act that created the Community Care Network, we actually want you to follow this, right? It just it's a little more specific, because what happens, though, if you're going back to like your high school civics class or Schoolhouse Rock, is that when a bill becomes a law, signed a law by the president, well, what happens there, right? Because now it's the law. Well, what happens after that? They don't really teach that in civics class. Well, what happens then the relevant agencies, in this case, the Department of Veterans Affairs, takes the law, reads it, and they've got a whole battalion of lawyers, and their lawyers look at it, and then they create a policy that's meant to reflect the law. Well, there's an awful lot of poetic license when we take the law and make policy, because lots of times lawmakers in Congress don't like to get too specific, right? They try to keep things general.
Of course.
So then the VA has their battalion of lawyers, and fortunately, the next general counsel of the VA, who hasn't been confirmed by the Senate, I know the guy, and I'm hoping he's going to do some good work. But those lawyers will take that and like, well, we followed the Mission Act, so here's our policy. Well, it turns out that the policy says, well, according to our policy, the access standards for mental health and addiction treatment are different than other sorts of care. It doesn't say anything about that in the Mission Act. So what the Access Act is here to do is to actually really codify those standards for mental health care and addiction treatment. Does that make sense? So I'd say call your congressman, call your senator. Are you in Nancy Mace's district?
Yes.
All right. Tell Nancy, I actually know some of her staffers, tell Nancy that access, and she's on the Veterans Affairs Committee, by the way, on House Veterans Affairs. Yeah. Tell Nancy, your next governor, too, by the way, I guess, she's a riot, by the way. She's a character.
Yeah, she's running for governor for sure.
Yeah, well, so while she's still in Congress, tell her that she needs to pass the Access Act. She'll probably vote for it, but I think that that's a big one. So, yeah, you call Nancy's office, let her know she needs to follow the Access Act as well.
I'm trying to get her on the podcast. I don't think it's going to happen.
Oh, interesting. I've met her a couple times, and and somewhere I know one or two of her staffers, but yeah, we'll see. It's too bad because she's your district.
I'll put that in the show notes. The Access Act.
Yes, yeah. You can look it up. It's in there right now. But yeah, call your congressman, call your senator. You got Lindsey and Tim Scott, right?
Flimsy Graham. Yeah, we're trying to get rid of him too.
Never seen a war he doesn't like. Man, I'll tell you what. He'd love to create.
He's a rhino.
He just wants to create more disabled veterans. He wants to send. He wants to send our sons and daughters in the mail to go get maimed and killed. No, I mean really.
Don't get me started.
But I mean, but the thing is, I say the same thing about Liz Cheney. They want to mail your kids overseas so they can go get maimed and killed. For what? For what? And I'm saying this is a guy that I spent a lot of time in the Middle East.
War is big business.
It is, and again, you're right. Military industrial complex, and guess what? And so is homelessness. So is addiction, and it's kind of messed up. And again, I know that I accept the reality that this problem isn't going away, not in our lifetimes. But if there was a way to fix it, I would gladly welcome it, and I'd find another way to make a living.
Right. Well, I'm glad you're there doing what you're doing anyway.
Appreciate it, James.
Yeah, Tom, thank you for being on the podcast episode today. To the listening audience, I want to say thank you for the privilege of your time. This podcast is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to share our podcast with your Second Amendment friends, family, and coworkers. Don't forget to get a hold of your Congress, your people in the Senate, your representatives that you are in the wherever, and have them pass the Access Act.
You got it.
I release a new episode every Friday at 8 a.m. You can contact me at lgrinfo@proton.me. That's lgrinfo@proton.me. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, James.